In the age of pharaohs, Pharaoh who dared the gods. In the age of pharaohs, when men bowed to gods, one man chose to challenge them, and history has tried to erase his name ever since. Beneath the weight of sand and silence, fragments remain of a pharaoh who refused obedience. His temples were not prayers but declarations of war, his monuments not offerings but weapons aimed at eternity itself. To walk into his shadow is to feel the fracture of heaven that a mortal hand once reached to seize the throne of the divine. And if such defiance was possible once, what stops it from happening again? When the throne of heaven trembled before a mortal. The pharaohs were not men in the sense you understand men. They were not merely rulers of flesh and empire, but structures of meaning, embodiments of order. To stand before one was not to face a body, but to face a system, a living equation binding heaven and earth. Their words bent time, their gestures rearranged the hierarchies of the cosmos. Yet what happens when such a figure ceases to obey the very pattern he is meant to embody? What if the throne of eternity itself shuddered, because one mortal dared to speak against the gods that made him? Among the annals of Egypt's dynasties lies a name that was buried as deliberately as it was carved: Akhenaten. A name meant to vanish, erased from temples, chiseled from stone, struck from king lists as though silence itself could consume his memory. But silence is never empty, it is the loudest echo of all. And what he dared to do was so violent to the structure of reality that even his erasure could not succeed. For Akhenaten did what none before him had the courage to attempt. He told a civilization that its gods were false. The priests had made eternity into a machinery of ritual. They fed the gods through offerings, maintained the balance of Maat through sacrifice and chant, and ensured the rising of the sun by kneeling before their temples. Every grain, every word, every drop of blood passed upward in obedience to this cosmic order. The pharaoh's role was to act as a bridge, not to challenge. He was supposed to embody the gods, not dethrone them. But Akhenaten looked upon this machinery and saw a lie. He declared that all gods were illusions, their temples unnecessary, their priests obsolete. Only the Aten, the living sun, the disk that pours light indiscriminately, was real, and he commanded Egypt to bow before this solitary blaze. But it was more than religion. It was an assault on the architecture of perception. Polytheism had allowed endless reflections of the self, gods of death, of fertility, of storms, of war, of hidden darkness. Every human impulse had a mirror in the pantheon. To worship meant to fragment yourself, to see pieces of your psyche written in divine flesh. By abolishing the many, Akhenaten abolished these mirrors. He declared that reality was not plural but singular, not fractured but burning in a single blinding point of light. It was not just a change in faith, it was a dismantling of consciousness itself. He shattered the psychological scaffolding upon which Egyptian identity rested. And in doing so, he created something terrifying, an empire forced to worship not many faces, but only one. But what happens when you worship the sun itself? A star that does not listen, that does not bend to prayer. Aten was not a god in the old sense. Aten was unapproachable, impersonal, beyond ritual. There were no myths of Aten walking among men, no stories of Aten drinking wine or judging the dead. The Aten was light itself, vast, burning, untouchable. For the first time, the Egyptians faced the idea of a god that could not be flattered, bribed, or persuaded. A god that gave life indiscriminately and took it just as easily. This was no god of personality. This was a cosmic principle, raw, silent, merciless. And here lies the collapse. Akhenaten did not just change the gods, he introduced abstraction. He severed humanity from the intimacy of divine narrative and thrust them into the cold glare of an indifferent universe. The old gods were personal, Aten was indifferent. What does it mean to stand beneath the sun and realize it neither sees you nor cares for you? What does it mean to pray into a silence so vast that your words dissolve before they leave your mouth? The empire trembled, temples to Amen were closed, priests were stripped of power, sacred names that had endured for millennia were outlawed, and in the new capital Akhenaten built a city that would serve only the Aten. The world itself was rewritten in stone, yet such rewriting came with violence, for to erase gods is to erase the people who lived through them. Farmers, craftsmen, mothers, and children who had prayed to Isis, to Osiris, to Ra, suddenly found their faiths branded false. Imagine the terror of a world where your prayers are declared invalid overnight. Imagine the psychic collapse of generations who discovered that their eternity was cancelled, that their gods had been annulled not by divine decree, but by the will of a single man. But was it madness or was it revelation? Historians argue priests raged, followers divided, but the deeper truth is more haunting. Akhenaten showed that divinity was not eternal but contingent, that gods could be dismissed, dismantled, outlawed, that the sacred is not sacred at all, it is constructed, maintained only so long as belief sustains it, and once belief falters, the heavens collapse. What does that say about the gods you still cling to now? About the systems of meaning you accept without question? Akhenaten's heresy did not survive him. After his death, the priests returned. His city was abandoned. His statues were broken, his name scraped from stone, his lineage cursed. But erasure is itself a form of preservation, for every scar tells a story. The fact that his name was so violently struck from history means it carried a weight too dangerous to ignore. The silence around him becomes its own kind of monument, a monument more enduring than any pyramid. For you cannot erase a question once it has been asked. And the question he asked was this: if man can dethrone the gods, then were they gods at all, or were they always fictions of power, veils for the will of men? And if Akhenaten could strip the sky bare, leaving only the burning indifference of a star, what prevents you from stripping away your own illusions until nothing remains? The god who devoured his own worshippers. When you imagine gods, you imagine protection, blessing, and the fragile comfort of being seen. Yet in Egypt, divinity was never kind. It was dangerous, transactional, devouring. The gods did not exist for your benefit, you existed for theirs. To live was to feed them, to bow before them, to maintain the delicate scaffolding of Maat so that creation did not collapse back into chaos. Your offerings of bread, beer, incense, and blood were not mere symbols. They were fuel, sustenance, a way to nourish powers that without you would weaken. What kind of God requires constant feeding? What kind of eternity is sustained only by your obedience? The priests never told you this plainly, but the truth was carved into ritual itself. The gods were hungry. Every day across the Nile, temples opened at dawn not for the people, but for the statues locked in their inner sanctuaries. Priests washed these divine images, dressed them, adorned them in jewelry, and laid banquets of food before them. The food was never eaten by the statues. After ritual, it was consumed by the priests. Yet the ritual logic remained. The god received its essence, its ka, its invisible energy. You did not eat for yourself, you ate for them. You did not labor for your own survival, you labored for theirs. And in this quiet inversion lies the collapse. The gods were not protecting you, you were protecting them. The entire edifice of worship was not upward but downward, feeding into the mouths of idols, into the endless hunger of eternity. You were not the beloved child of heaven. You were livestock, carefully managed, endlessly consumed. Consider the god Amen, the hidden one, whose temples swelled with treasure and power. By the time of Akhenaten's rebellion, Amen's priests were wealthier than kings. His temples were cities unto themselves, a parallel empire within the empire. His power did not come from heaven, but from the tribute of farmers, merchants, and peasants forced to labor endlessly to maintain the god's appetite. And yet, Amen himself was invisible, absent, hidden. His priests claimed to mediate his will, but no one ever saw him. What is the difference between a god too hidden to be known and a god who never existed at all? Akhenaten understood this. His revolution was not only against the pantheon, but against the hunger of the priesthood, against the endless consumption of life by the god's machinery. He offered instead Aten, who demanded no sacrifice but light itself. Yet even Aten became devouring, for what is the sun if not the greatest consumer? Every moment it burns, it consumes hydrogen, devouring its own body until collapse is inevitable. The Aten was no savior, it was entropy disguised as radiance. But step deeper into this paradox. What if gods exist precisely because they consume? What if divinity has always been parasitic, drawing its reality from your belief, your rituals, your fear? Without you, they dissolve. Without your endless offerings, they starve. The gods are not creators, they are creations, dependent upon your attention, your submission. Does this not mirror the structures that rule your own life now? Your governments, your economies, your religions, they too are gods that devour, requiring your labor, your obedience, your offerings of time and energy. You imagine they protect you, but they survive only by consuming you. Just as Amen thrived while peasants starved, so too do your modern gods thrive as you burn your days in their service. And still, you call them necessary. But Egypt, more than any civilization, encoded this truth openly in ritual. The weighing of the heart against the feather of Maat was not a metaphor for moral purity. It was a ledger, a measurement of balance, a cosmic accounting. Your worth was not inherent, it was transactional. Your soul could be devoured by Ammit, the eater of hearts, if the scales tipped. Even in death, you were not free, you were food. Eternity was not promised. It was conditional, predicated upon your ability to feed the cosmic machinery with correct words, correct offerings, correct obedience. Imagine standing before the tribunal of Osiris, your heart trembling on the scale, every mistake, every forgotten offering, every slip of ritual precision threatening to tip the balance. Imagine eternity hanging on a formula, a code you could never fully master. Does this sound like salvation, or does it sound like terror disguised as order? And deeper still, why did the Egyptians fear chaos above all else? Because chaos meant liberation. If the structure collapsed, the gods would starve, the priests would lose their power, the machinery of sacrifice would grind to a halt. Perhaps this was the true heresy of Akhenaten, not monotheism but exposure. He revealed that the gods could be dethroned, that their hunger was not infinite but fragile, dependent upon human compliance. And yet even his Aten devoured. For the sun gives life, yes, but it also burns skin, blinds eyes, cracks earth into dust, kills crops in drought. The same light that nourishes also destroys. Worshipping Aten was worshipping the paradox of sustenance and annihilation bound together. To bow to Aten was to bow to the inevitability that every giver of life is also the taker of it. So ask yourself, when you kneel, when you pray, when you obey, are you being blessed or are you being eaten? Are you preserving order or are you merely feeding the jaws of something vast, indifferent, and insatiable? And if the gods themselves require you in order to exist, if they are only alive so long as you believe in them, then who is the true God, them or you? The Pharaoh who tried to outlive death. Death to you is an ending, a moment where breath stops, flesh cools, and memory dissolves into nothing. But to the Pharaoh, death was never final. It was an architecture, a science, a weapon. For in Egypt, no ruler truly reigned unless he conquered death or at least convinced the living that he had. And so every monument you still see on the desert plateau, every pyramid clawing at the horizon is not merely a tomb. It is a machine built to cheat death itself. The pyramid texts whisper this truth in fragments, broken lines that speak of ascension, transformation, transfiguration. The Pharaoh was not meant to decay in silence. He was meant to rise, to consume the stars, to merge with Ra in his solar bark, to become imperishable. But how does stone achieve this? How does geometry defy mortality? The secret was not only in scale but in resonance. The pyramids were aligned with Orion's belt, with Sirius, with the eternal northern stars that never set. In their chambers, stone sang. Granite vibrated under sound, echoing in frequencies that altered the body, the brain, the very perception of time. These were not mere burial chambers, but resonant halls, machines designed to alter consciousness, to dissolve the Pharaoh's identity into eternity. Death was not the extinguishing of the self, but its transformation into something inhuman, immortal, unrecognizable. Do you see the collapse already forming? If the Pharaoh's immortality was engineered, then eternity itself was manufactured. And if eternity can be built, then it can also be dismantled. What you call the soul may not be a divine spark at all, but a frequency, something that can be tuned, amplified, sustained, or silenced. What if your afterlife is not an inherent truth but a construct, built from rituals and resonances that trick the brain into believing it survives? The Egyptians buried their kings with spells, amulets, and formulas, not because they were superstitious, but because they were precise. Every word, every carving, every object was a component in the machinery of resurrection. The Book of the Dead was not scripture, it was a manual, a coded system to hack the boundaries of consciousness. The afterlife was not waiting, it had to be engineered, word by word, stone by stone. And the Pharaoh was the prototype. His immortality was the experiment. You were not given that chance. The commoner did not ascend, they decayed. The ruler's eternity was built upon your labor, your offerings, your silence. His immortality fed upon your mortality. To make him a god, you had to remain dust. But even the Pharaoh knew the truth. Death was not defeated, only delayed. His mummy was a corpse wrapped in symbols, his tomb a sealed experiment. What is a mummy if not a body trapped between life and death, neither rotting fully nor living again? Immortality was not triumph, it was suspension. A frozen state where identity is neither annihilated nor free. Eternity was not paradise, it was prison. Modern science circles this same paradox. Cryonics freezes bodies in the hope that one day they can be revived. Digital consciousness experiments promise to upload the mind into machines to preserve identity beyond flesh. But what is preserved? Is it you or only a copy? If your memories can be recorded, replayed, and simulated, what remains of you? If a pharaoh's soul could be engineered by geometry and ritual and yours by code and circuitry, then what are you but data endlessly rewritten? The Egyptians carved their fear into stone. Eternity is not freedom but a trap. Osiris himself, lord of the underworld, was a god dismembered, resurrected, bound forever to rule the land of the dead. Even the gods could not escape death, they could only manage it, manipulate it, suspend it in cycles of dismemberment and rebirth. If even Osiris was not free, what makes you think immortality would be liberation? Look closer at the sarcophagi. Their inner surfaces were lined with stars, with maps of the heavens, with spells etched to guide the soul. The pharaoh did not expect to walk freely into paradise. He expected to struggle, to fight, to bargain his way through gates, guardians, and terrors. Death was not a release, but another kingdom, ruled, bureaucratic, merciless. To live was bondage, to die was bondage. Eternity was only a longer chain. And yet still the pharaoh dared the gods. By engineering his own resurrection, he claimed a power forbidden, to rival the divine order itself. For what is a god if not immortal? And what is immortal who achieves immortality if not a god? The pyramids are blasphemies written in stone, acts of rebellion disguised as devotion. They are monuments to the pharaoh's audacity, the refusal to accept divine law, the refusal to vanish into silence. But here is the fracture. If the pharaoh could build eternity, then eternity is not divine, it is human. Not a gift but a construct, not an afterlife but an architecture. And if it can be built, it can be dismantled. If it can be engineered, it can be hacked. If it can be repeated, it can be falsified. What if every promise of eternity, religious, scientific, or spiritual, is nothing but a machine built to keep you obedient? So ask yourself, if death is inescapable but eternity is a prison, which is worse, to end or to endure forever? The throne built against the gods. Power has always been measured in proximity to the divine. Kings ruled not merely because they commanded armies, but because they claimed to sit closer to heaven. In Egypt, this intimacy with the gods was not symbolic, it was engineered into the very throne the pharaoh occupied. His seat was not only carved from stone and gold, it was constructed as a conduit, a channel through which divine law could be rewritten. To sit upon it was to perform blasphemy disguised as sanctity. You have been told that the pharaoh was the son of Ra, the chosen, the living god, but that title was not inherited, it was manufactured. The coronation itself was an experiment in collapsing the barrier between man and God. Rituals of anointment, words inscribed in hidden chambers, ceremonies carried out at precise astronomical moments, these were not empty gestures. They were technologies, coded systems of control designed to rewire perception. When the priests declared the pharaoh divine, they were not affirming his divinity, they were creating it. And here is the horror: if divinity can be created, it can also be destroyed. The gods are no longer eternal, they are constructs. They can be dethroned, dismantled, erased. If the pharaoh could dare the gods by fabricating himself as one of them, then the gods themselves are no different from men. Illusions maintained through ritual repetition, belief, and fear. Consider the Est festival, that ritual of renewal where the pharaoh, grown old, was made young again in the eyes of the people. He did not merely celebrate, he reenacted creation itself. He drank from sacred vessels, ran ritual courses, performed feats of strength. It was a theater of immortality, a staged defiance of age, a denial of decay. But behind the performance was a truth darker than the desert's night. The people were not witnessing renewal, they were complicit in the illusion. Their belief was the energy that sustained the deception. Without them, the throne would collapse. Without their faith, the pharaoh was only flesh, only dust. And so, what is belief but fuel? What are gods but parasites feeding on the devotion of mortals? If the pharaoh could engineer his divinity from ceremonies and stone, then the gods themselves are only constructs feeding on your obedience. And here is the collapse: perhaps it has always been this way. Perhaps every god ever worshipped, every divinity ever enthroned was never divine at all, but only manufactured, powered by ritual, ritual powered by belief, belief powered by fear. Modern science offers its own parallel illusions. Social experiments show how authority is created not by truth but by perception. In the Milgram experiment, ordinary people administered what they believed were lethal shocks simply because a man in a white coat told them to. Authority was not inherent, it was performed. And people obeyed not the truth but the performance. The pharaoh's throne was no different. It was not the gods who gave him power, but the spectacle of authority itself. The throne was a laboratory. Every inscription, every symbol, every ritual surrounding it was a test, an attempt to fuse human will with divine law. To sit upon it was to gamble against heaven, to declare oneself untouchable. Yet the throne was also a trap. For the moment the pharaoh became divine, he could no longer be human. His joys, his fears, his frailties, all erased beneath the mask of eternity. He was bound by his own daring. He could not step down, could not falter, could not return to the realm of mortals. Divinity, once seized, was a prison. And so the throne was not merely a seat of power, but a cage. A structure designed to hold the pharaoh hostage within his own illusion. For what is more terrifying than achieving godhood, only to realize you are trapped within the very lie you created? The gods were silent, they did not descend to strike him down, they allowed him to sit, to reign, to build. And this silence was more damning than punishment. It confirmed the suspicion that the gods did not exist beyond ritual, that their power was only ever a mirror reflecting human ambition. The pharaoh sat upon his throne not because the gods permitted it, but because the gods had no power to stop it. The throne becomes your mirror too. You live under illusions of authority every day, political, religious, scientific. You believe in laws, leaders, and truths because they sit upon thrones built from ritual repetition and collective obedience. But strip away the ritual, the symbols, the performance, and what remains: a human body, a mortal voice, flesh pretending to be divine. And if your gods are constructs, if your rulers are actors, if your truths are performances, then what is real? The collapse is not only in Pharaoh's daring, but in your reflection of it. The throne he built against the gods is the same throne you build in your mind: illusions enthroned, obedience enforced, power sustained not by truth but by the terror of asking, what if nothing is sacred? So tell me, when the throne itself is empty, who is it that you are still bowing to? The pharaohs war against time. Every empire fears only one enemy, not rebellion, not famine, not war, but time. The pharaohs knew this more than anyone. Sand erodes monuments, flesh decays, memory withers into silence. To rule the present is one thing, but to defeat time is to rule forever. And so the pharaoh who dared the gods launched his true war not against men, not even against heaven, but against the very erosion of eternity. The pyramids are not tombs, they are weapons. Their sharp geometry aligned with stars was not built to house corpses, it was constructed to pierce the illusion of temporality. Every block was an act of defiance, every alignment a rebellion against the ticking of the cosmic clock. To enter a pyramid is to step into a machine designed to freeze, distort, and control time itself. Why do you think they were so impossible to build, even by today's standards? Because they were not built for practicality, but to serve as prisons for decay. And yet time leaks. The pharaoh who dared the gods sought eternity in stone, but eternity corrodes. Sandstorms buried inscriptions, floods of history washed away names. The very monuments that proclaimed his defiance became ruins, proof not of victory but of defeat. What greater irony could there be, that the war against time was fought with weapons already crumbling at the moment of their construction? Look closer, the walls of tombs are inscribed with spells from the Book of the Dead, incantations meant to guide the pharaoh's soul through the underworld past serpents, lakes of fire, and devouring gods. But do you not see? These were not maps of the afterlife, they were encryption keys, attempts to encode consciousness so it could survive beyond flesh. Words as software, chisels as code, stone as the hard drive of eternity. Each symbol was an attempt to outwit entropy, to preserve the self against the decay of memory. Modern science whispers the same futility. Consider the second law of thermodynamics: entropy always increases. Systems decay, order collapses into disorder, energy spreads until nothing remains but heat, death. The pharaoh, in daring to defy the gods, was in fact daring to defy physics itself. He was fighting a battle no one can win. Yet perhaps he understood something more dangerous, that the battle itself is the only way to mask the terror of inevitable collapse. And you are no different. You too build monuments against time, not pyramids, but photographs, archives, digital files, legacies written into data. You post, you store, you inscribe, hoping that something of you will outlast your body. But data too corrupts, files degrade, servers die, memory fails. Your monuments will be no more eternal than those of the pharaoh. You are fighting the same war and you will lose. There is an experiment you may have heard of, the false memory effect. Psychologists have shown that entire events can be implanted into people's minds, memories that never happened yet feel as real as the ones that did. If memory can be rewritten, then what does it mean to survive in time? If all that remains of you is memory, but memory itself is unstable, then your survival is not survival at all, it is only illusion. The pharaoh's inscriptions were no different. He etched himself into stone so that memory would never falter, but memory falters anyway. His name is forgotten, distorted, misread. His eternity collapses into dust. The pharaoh's war against time was not noble, it was madness. For in daring to challenge time, he made himself its most visible victim. Without his monuments, without his defiance, he might have dissolved quietly into anonymity, escaped the notice of entropy. But by etching his existence into stone, by raising monuments so large they scar the earth, he ensured that his failure would be eternal. His defeat was made cosmic, his loss preserved forever in the ruins that now litter the desert. And here lies the most unbearable thought. Perhaps this was always the gods' trap. They did not strike him down with lightning. They allowed him to believe he could conquer time. They let him build, let him labor, let him carve eternity into stone. And then slowly, inevitably, they let time erase it all. Silence is the cruelest vengeance. And you, reader, do you not feel the same trap tightening around your own life? Every attempt you make to preserve yourself, every act of recording, every memory hoarded is already dying in the moment of its creation. You live as if there is permanence, but permanence is the cruelest illusion of all. The pharaoh did not build pyramids to house his body. He built them to house the lie that he could survive time. You too build pyramids, only smaller, digital, fragile, and you too will fail. So ask yourself, when even eternity becomes a ruin, what is left to save? The god who was only a reflection. The pharaoh who dared the gods made one final gamble. If he could not conquer time, he would at least conquer the gods themselves. But how does one challenge a deity? With armies, with sacrifices, with prayers? No, the pharaoh discovered a darker path. To defeat a god, one must unmask it. To reveal that divinity is nothing more than a reflection of human fear, cast back upon the world like a shadow mistaken for substance. The gods of Egypt were never absent. They lurked in every grain of sand, every shift of the Nile, every flicker of the sun. Osiris ruled the underworld, Ra carried the sun across the sky, Thoth measured truth, Anubis guarded the passage of souls. But the pharaoh understood the secret. These gods existed not because they ruled, but because humans believed. They were fed by attention, sustained by ritual, their immortality purchased by human obedience. And so he dared to turn away. He stopped offering blood to the altars, withheld the prayers that bound gods to thrones, and declared himself divine. Not because he was more powerful, but because he saw the truth. If gods are fed by worship, then to starve them is to kill them. And if to kill them is impossible, then at least one can consume their power by stealing the faith that sustained them. This was not madness, it was psychology centuries before psychology existed. Today we know it as the observer effect. A thing behaves differently when watched. The gods were only ever powerful because they were observed. Remove the gaze and their power collapses. What the pharaoh uncovered was the most dangerous secret. Divinity is a mirror and humans are the light that makes it shine. Yet this revelation is not liberating, it is devastating. For if gods are only reflections, then what does that make us? We have always looked upward for meaning, believing it descends from above. But if gods are illusions projected from below, then meaning has no source, no anchor. The pharaoh, in dethroning the gods, did not set humanity free. He unchained humanity from all foundations, casting existence into an abyss with no center. Do you see it? This is the same collapse that modern psychology discovered with the Rosenhan experiment. In the 1970s, healthy individuals feigned hallucinations and were admitted into psychiatric hospitals. Once inside, they behaved normally, but doctors and staff interpreted every action through the lens of illness. They were trapped, defined not by who they were but by how they were observed. The label became reality. The reflection was mistaken for the truth. The pharaoh's gods were no different. They were labels imposed upon the universe, names given to chaos, masks placed on the unexplainable. Once the label existed, reality bent to it. Crops grew, thank Osiris. Crops failed, curse Osiris. The god was not the cause, only the frame, and the frame became indistinguishable from truth. But the pharaoh's rebellion was not a triumph. For in declaring himself a god, he merely stepped into the same trap. He became the reflection. His power was no longer flesh and blood, it was belief, projection, illusion. His divinity was fragile, dependent on others' obedience. He did not dethrone the gods, he replaced them. And so his name too became a mask, a reflection mistaken for substance, until his humanity was erased beneath the weight of a crown he could not remove. And is this not what you do as well? You worship gods of another kind now, science, progress, reason. You speak of evolution, relativity, quantum mechanics. But do you truly understand them? Or do you merely repeat words, invoke equations like spells, believe in them because others believe? You bow to them as the ancients bowed to Ra, convinced that truth is descending from above, when in fact it is still only a reflection of human perception, a frame imposed upon the chaos of the unknown. And worse, you worship yourself. Social media makes you both pharaoh and god, reflected endlessly in screens, sustained by attention, powerful only as long as you are observed. Likes become offerings, followers your worshippers, your identity carved not in stone but in pixels. You believe yourself divine, but your divinity is only as strong as your reflection. Remove the gaze and you collapse into nothing. The pharaoh understood this collapse too late. In daring to unmask the gods, he unmasked himself. He saw that the face he presented to his people, the eternal image carved into statues, painted in tombs, written into texts, was not him but a mask, a reflection, a god sustained by worship. His true self, if such a thing ever existed, was gone, drowned beneath layers of projection. Perhaps this is why statues of pharaohs always stare with that same expression, cold, eternal, empty, not because they captured his likeness, but because there was no likeness left to capture. The man had been erased, only the reflection remained. And you, what is left of you beneath your own reflections? The roles you play, the names you wear, the memories others project onto you, are you so different from the pharaoh's statues? Or are you too only a reflection, a mask sustained by the gaze of others? If the gods were never real, if the pharaoh himself was only an illusion, then what remains when every reflection is stripped away? The tomb that was not a tomb. They told you the pyramids were tombs, silent chambers for the dead, monuments of grief and reverence. But if you peel back the lies, you discover they were never tombs at all. No bodies were found within the Great Pyramid, no sarcophagi sealed with the dust of kings. The chambers were empty, empty by design, which means they were not monuments of death, but instruments of something else entirely. The pharaoh who dared the gods understood this. He did not build for his body, he built for his mind. The pyramid was not a grave but a machine of consciousness, calibrated with impossible precision. Every angle, every alignment, every chamber was a calculation, a geometry that did not mourn death but attempted to pierce it. The pharaoh did not want to be remembered, he wanted to transcend. Look closely, the Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 1/15 of a degree, a feat modern engineers still struggle to replicate without satellite data. Its base is a perfect square, its height proportioned to encode the number pi, its internal shafts angled toward Orion and Sirius. These are not the designs of mourning, they are the architecture of obsession. Obsession with time, with eternity, with the possibility of hacking reality itself. You were told these were coincidences, but there are no coincidences when stone is cut to fit within a hair's breadth. This was not mere construction, it was experiment. The pharaoh turned his kingdom into a laboratory, his people into tools, his monuments into equations carved in stone. And his question was simple, terrible, unanswerable. Can a mind survive the death of the body if reality itself is bent to trap it? This is why the chambers are empty. The pharaoh was not entombed, he was uploaded. His body was discarded, but his mind, his consciousness was meant to be housed within the geometry of stone. The pyramid was a vessel, a hard drive written not with silicon but with proportion, resonance, and cosmic alignment. His tomb was not a container for a corpse, it was a container for eternity. And modern science whispers the same horror. Think of the split brain experiment.